Biotech 2009-2010, the panel discussion. Regarded as the mega mala amongst the students, the constructive fight of the minds. The topic of the discussion is global and sustainable energy demands, role of we, the chemical engineers. The topic, which is much awaited to be talked about, and based on the inputs from the buzz of the department, and one of the most Googled words of 2009. This topic was selected based on inputs from recent events, conferences happening around the world, especially the Copenhagen Summit 2009, and the related controversies. The personalities of the panel discussion scale the heights in the respective field, and the decisions taken here could be the stepping stone in the futuristic decisions taken in this particular field. We have an announcement for the audience. If you have any questions regarding the topics that is discussed during the panel discussion, you can put up your hands. We have our volunteers who will be passing on some sheets to you. You can write down the questions in that, and that will be passed on to the moderator of the event, which will be screened, and if it's important, the question will be raised towards the end of the session. Without further ado, I would like to invite the moderator of the session, Prof. Tong Enwa, one of the GSA advisors, and he has been very supportive throughout the act in the past few years, instrumental in providing us the feedback in how to organize, and he was more of a mentor for us, and it's very apt that we have him to moderate the session. Prof.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for being here and coming to the panel discussion. This probably is the last event before the closing ceremony, so I'm glad to see all of you still participating. Before I introduce the discussion for itself, let me invite the panel members to come down. We have very distinguished panel members from all over the world and in their various different fields. Please, the panel members include Professor William Krantz, who is from the U.S. We have Mr. Joe Yi. We have Dr. Michael Kwa. We have Mr. Sanjay Chawan, and we have Mr. Derek Harkering. So just a brief introduction for all of the panel members. Professor William Krantz actually is a longtime friend of the Department of Chemical Engineering at NUS. He has been here many times, and he has even taken part as the Isaac Meyer professorship at the department in the past 3 years. Unfortunately, he's now over at NTU, or fortunately or not, but we are happy that he's still here as our friend and taking part in the panel discussion. Dr. Michael Kwa is a principal fellow at the Energy Studies Institute. He's also a chemical engineer, but he's now more into the role of a think tank, trying to provide his thoughts into how energy should be implemented in Singapore. Mr. Sanjay Chawan is the site director of Sanofi Aventis. He just came to Singapore about 3 or 4 years ago, and he's heading the Sanofi Aventis plant in Tuas. Mr. Joe Yi is well known in Singapore. He's the vice chair of the Institute of Chemical Engineers branch in Singapore, and he's also the director of his company in Singapore. So it's our pleasure to have him here. And finally, Mr. Derek Harkering is the site director for the Singapore Chemicals plant of ExxonMobil. So he handles one of the biggest investments in Singapore of ExxonMobil. So, and they are building a new plant as part of the Singapore chemical plant currently. So a round of applause for our panel members. The topic for today's discussion is a very interesting topic, and I think potentially very controversial topic. We are happy to have a wide field of experts who will give us their thoughts and ideas on how we should think about global and sustainable energy demands, and especially how chemical engineers can take part in this. The panel members are all chemical engineers, but even though they are now currently working in the different fields as in chemical production, pharmaceutical production, consultancy, and energy policy. We will start by talking about maybe giving their perspectives on how energy efficiency and sustainability should be taken into account. Maybe I'd like to invite Professor Bill Krantz. The energy demand is one of the biggest topics these days, and sustainability of energy involves other factors other than just using of energy. There are social policy, social implications, there are economical impacts, and the policy impacts on using energy. So how do you think we should handle the keeping energy sustainable and making efficient use of the energy in the next few years?
Good. Thank you, Yanhua. Everybody hear me in back? Is it good? Back row? All right, thank you. I think the way I'd like to just tackle that question in the beginning is to maybe throw out what we mean by the concept of sustainable energy. And the definition I like best, which is the broadest one, was proposed by the British Renewable Energy and Efficiency Partnership. And they define sustainable energy as effectively the provision of energy such that it meets the needs of the future without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And they go on to say that sustainable energy has two key components: renewable energy and energy efficiency. And that's a broader definition. In other words, it's not just things like looking at biomass and looking at wind, looking at wave, looking at tidal. It's looking at efficient use of our energy sources of today. So that's the broader definition of sustainable energy. I think another thing, and then I'm going to turn it over to the real experts on this panel, is to get some idea of where we are energy-wise. I think it's very important to know what the world energy consumption is. It's a number so big that it's a little hard to grasp it. It's 15 terawatts of power. That's an energy consumption rate. Okay, so mega is 10 to the 6th, and giga is 10 to the 9th, and tera is 10 to the 12th, so that's an enormous rate. Where can we save money? Where can we use our knowledge and develop new renewable resources, sustainable energy? You want to work, you kind of want to tackle the problem where it's biggest, and it turns out of the world energy use, 37% of it is used by industry. That's the largest single consumer of energy. The next biggest area, and this is one where chemical engineers, to address the question that Prof. Yanhua directed to me, where chemical engineers can play a role, is energy losses. 27% of the world energy use is lost. And a lot of that's very low rank, waste heat. And interestingly, as we're going to hear from some of the other experts, this is a major thrust in Singapore, is focusing on waste energy recovery. The other two major uses of energy are transportation, 20%, and residential, 11%. I think with that kind of broad pass at what we're talking about this afternoon, namely how big is our energy consumption and who uses it and what do we mean by sustainable energy, I think I'd like to defer to our chair again and let somebody else say something intelligent.
All right. So that is a very interesting question. So maybe you would like to invite Dr. Hua to give us his perspective on energy efficiency.
Yeah, I'll start on energy efficiency, but before I start, just to give you that, I'm actually from the U.S. I'm just new to Singapore, so being a Yank, if I am a little too outspoken, just make sure someone kick me or something like that. But I've just finished writing a roadmap for Singapore from now till 200 years. And the 200-year thing is a very interesting one. You can ask that later. But in the very beginning, and those of you who may have heard my talk on the roadmap, I'm actually reprising it at RSIS at NTU later. I begin with a statement that technology is an absolutely necessary but totally insufficient condition. Those of you who are mathematicians can understand. When you look at this area of sustainability, technology is an absolutely necessary but totally insufficient condition for solving it. And part of the reason is how big our energy use. But let's take a look at why energy efficiency is important. In one of the talks I had given, just understand that coming from the US, we have to be very ashamed. We're 5% of the world's population. We use 25% of the world's energy. So when you look at that number, several things can jump at you. It tells you that either we really love to use energy because we drive SUVs over long distances, or buried in it is what Bill Krantz talked about, that there are really a lot of inefficiencies or losses in that system. And one friend of mine did a calculation. He's from Wow Energies in Texas, where he just basically looked at the heat losses from the energy-intensive industries in the U.S. These are smokestacks from heavy industries. And he did this very simple back-of-the-envelope calculation, that if you look at the losses from the energy-intensive industries in the U.S., and you capture, and this number, you have to go back a few years because this was done 5 years ago. Things have changed, but the magnitude will scare you. He said, if you look at that heat losses from these smokestacks, and if you can recover 20% of those heat losses, thus 20% would account for 100% or more than 100% of all the renewable energy projects that was going on in the US 5 years ago. 20% of losses from the smokestacks, if you can do a heat recovery, and those of you who are chemical engineers, if you use a cascading closed loop Rankine cycles to recover the heat, 20% will be more than 100% of all the renewable energy projects in the US at that time. So, having said that, you will understand why your MEWR in its wisdom is focusing on conservation and energy efficiency as really the #1 program in Singapore, and later I'll give you some examples of how you can work it out. But the bottom line is, before I pass it on, is chemical engineers, we know how to deal with systems, or systems of systems. You know, we break it down to unit operations and you optimize the unit operations. But now if you link up several unit operations, you can still learn to optimize the system. So using that in mind, think of the whole work on sustainability as really how do you do systems of systems optimization. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Sanjay, how would the pharmaceutical industry view improving energy efficiency then? Is it an important role that, or important source of recovering energy so that you can save money?
Yes, absolutely. Before we came down here on this platform, we were sitting around and somebody said, you're from the pharma, so you don't have to worry about costs and so on. Those of you who plan to come to the pharma industry, you are most welcome, but please don't think there won't be cost pressures in the pharma industry. That's not true. I think the pharma industry, in a way, has a very important role in whole of this energy management area. Because, you see, that after several big debates that are going on around the world now, one concerns public health and healthcare management in particular. And then this puts pressures back to the pharma industry, which starts to look at different things in order to cut costs and so on. There's a component of research and so on which we cannot do a lot, but I can tell you we, as a result of all of this, are looking completely anew at our energy structures. Where do we spend, how much do we spend, how much we can save, and so on. Coming to our own site here and my area, which is industrial affairs, which is production, distribution, and so on, if I remember correctly, most of our projects that we are doing now, that is investment projects, pertain to energies. here in Singapore we are doing a project which will substitute a lot of the old chilling and cooling systems with more efficient ones, and we hope to save from next year 25% of our electricity. So that's the kind of projects we are looking at. What is also happening in farm industry, but also in others when I talk to people from the other industry, is I think we're giving whole of this management concept a new look. For example, when we started to look at paybacks, to start with, we had one policy on how we invest, how we get the payback, how we calculate the payback, and how do we choose projects that we're going to do. Clearly now we distinguish between projects that are related to energy infrastructure, long-term cost savings, and projects that are related to, let's say, products, new molecules, and which have to do with our pharma business. I think these are the kind of things that we're doing on our front in energy management. I would like to add a couple of things about engineers and chemical engineers on this front. I think it's a pleasure to be here among so many chemical engineers also on this dais. I think chemical engineers have a special role. I mean, you start to read any article or anything on energy management, sustainable energy, and so on, and every line you see a role for chemical engineers. Simply because this is a group that can talk to so many different types of agencies. I mean, we can talk to chemists, we can talk to engineers, we can talk to civil engineers, we can talk to metallurgists. And I think that's where mainly the role of chemical engineers comes. On this dais you see consultants, energy experts, and so on, and we have chemical engineering examples from people like, not chemical engineers as examples in the form of Jack Welch or Arthur D. Little and so on. When we see the whole gamut of areas, whether it's technologies, different technologies, strategies and management that we can cover, I think we surely have a very big role to play in this area of energy management. So that's all I have to say for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I ask Mr. Lee, maybe I would like to ask Mr. Harkering, how does then the petrochemical industry respond to this same question? Is it a factor in transportation also? Because the logistics for the petrochemical industry probably is a much bigger issue.
The biggest issue, energy-wise, is our production process. At Jurong Island, we run a steam cracker, and a steam cracker is one of the most energy-intensive chemical processes you can imagine. So, for our plant in Singapore, but also for all our plants elsewhere in the world, and I think also for our ExxonMobil refineries, energy is a very important cost. And when I talk to my people, I always say it's also a great opportunity because it's an easy way of saving money. It's an easy way of saving money, and it's also environmentally good. So there's no reason not to do it. So there's a lot of effort in the chemical industry that goes into saving energy, and it's not just our company alone. It's all the different companies, and the opportunities that we find to save energy are usually the result of the product of the brains of chemical engineers or of chemical engineers together with other engineers. There's a lot of energy conservation innovation that has come from within the company, and we need to keep on doing that because the key in both chemical production is to make your product as cheap as you can make it, because you make a lot. To get back to your question, the transportation in itself is, I think, only a minor factor, but it is a factor in the cost. And also there, you want to save energy as much as you can. It's maybe not so much in the chemical part of our company that we've been working that quite hard. We've been working it hard on for LNG lately, because LNG is going to be shipped around the world, and you want to do that as efficient as possible, just as you want to run your plants as efficient as possible. So we've been working that quite hard, and there's some considerable energy savings. So energy is extremely important to us, not just from producing it, because that we do as well in the refineries in our upstream business, but also on the consumption side when it comes to running our business.
That's interesting. So, Mr. Yeats, do you have any advice for the industry and for the academia on how to improve energy efficiency as chemical engineers?
I think I'd like to step back first and focus on some of the bigger number pictures and then go and home in. If we follow something as a report out there called Global Footprint, we're currently estimated in the world to be using 1.4 planets worth of resources. By 2050, we've got a population growth of another 50%, potentially to 9 billion people. The mass balance of the Earth doesn't work. That's probably the simplest thing to say for chemical engineers. If we then look at Singapore in that context, it's currently using approximately 4 planets worth of resources. And if we look at our neighbours, Malaysia is using about 1 planet's worth. With the population growth alone, Malaysia will go to 1.7 planets worth by 2050. We then listened to the Stern report, which is probably one of the big environmental reports, and he stated there in that report that we probably have to defossilise our energy by 70% by 2050. That means you have 40 years, actually less, to solve the energy problem and to get it implemented and in production. That's probably where the big focus has to come from, and chemical engineers will have a dramatic role to play within that, to come up with the research and the technology to achieve these figures so that we can carry on living the way we are today. How we go about it, I think demand side is one thing which we really have to focus on rather than necessarily generating more energy. We know how to generate energy, but it's how we use it and how we embed it into our lifestyles. We're very individualistic in how we deal with things. So every single house has an individual air conditioning system. Whereas on an industrial scale, if we went to that wouldn't work. We want to look at how we can centralise potential resources. And it's not just treating energy as electricity, but it's treating it as heat as well. And as chemical engineers, we can understand the difference between heat energy and electrical energy. And we can use chemical or thermal energy to create electricity, but we can use it for a lot more. So it's going to be quite a big paradigm type shift in how we build our plants, build our towns and cities, and we're going to have to look at what technology is going to be involved there to try and reduce the demand side down drastically enough that we can still create and use enough energy to carry on without causing a lot of trouble. One other aspect to think about is a lot of push towards biofuels, I think, is a very keen focus, but we're again fighting over the same land that's going to be happening, that we're going to be used up for food as well. So moving the problem somewhere else doesn't solve the problem. It might solve it short term, but it's going to create a lot more problems coming down the stream. So when you're looking at areas you want to be researching in, you need to be thinking about where it fits into the bigger picture, that you're not creating 10 more problems by solving that one problem that's going to for the short term.
So one of the areas that we can improve in is trying to improve how we use energy. So how we're going to use it better, use it maybe for increased productivity. But the other way to look at it is if we can generate more energy in an alternative manner instead of using fossil fuel. So Bill, what do you think of the alternative sources of energy rather than trying to save on petrochemical or petroleum-based fuels?
That's an interesting question. It turns out that some figures I looked at in terms of energy resources, it pretty much indicates where we should go. Maybe are we... Is that better? Back row, is that better? Okay. It turns out if you look at energy supplies, like where do we want to focus for alternative energy? And one way they calculate this is they look at a year joule, a YJ. And a year joule is looking at energy per year. And if you look at fossil fuels, the total resources left on the best world estimates are 0.4 year joules. If you look at nuclear, a resource that we think is, some people will include it among renewable, it's not really, but people think it's a lot, it's 2.5 year joules. But if you look at renewable, it's 3.8 per year. So you multiply, I mean, because it's renewable, you can't give a total year joule, you have to do year joules per year. The amount of energy available through renewable resources is enormous. But and to give you an idea what it is, for the United States alone, if you take our estimate of all of our energy resources that we have, renewable and non-renewable, 93% of the United States energy resources are classified as renewable. It's an interesting figure. So this kind of says it's a pretty important area to work in. But one of the most promising areas is solar. Because if you look at the amount of energy supplied by solar, it's in theory orders of magnitude greater. The number is so large, and I'm looking to find it here because I wrote it down somewhere. Excuse me for a second while I have a senior moment. The sun's energy supply to the Earth in terms of power is a number so large, it's incomprehensible. It's 174 petawatts, okay? Not mega, not giga, not tera, it's the next one up, petawatts. This says that if we can figure out some way to harness the sun's energy in an efficient way, that it's maybe the gateway to really addressing the problems. But there's been some very interesting progress there. If you look at Germany, Germany now is the largest consumer of photovoltaic cells for solar energy conversion. It's not actually in the sun belt of this world, okay? But they're the world leaders. They're doing the most. So my feeling is one of the most promising areas as far as renewable is certainly solar. But I think in terms of an immediate focus, I think in the broader definition, one of the reasons I wanted to get the definition of sustainable energy out there is waste energy. And waste energy is enormous. We already said it's like 25% of the world's energy is wasted. It's been alluded to that this energy is, a lot of it's very low quality. Typical, if you take refinery waste, the average temperature is usually cooling water. It's about 80, 85 degrees C. Calculate the Carnot efficiency. I mean, we use Rankine's cycle for recovery of that. But if you look at Carnot efficiency, about 10 or 11%. Why? Because you don't have much of a sensible heat driving force if you want to transfer it to 20 or 25 degrees C. Where should we be going? There are ways to transfer heat where you don't need a sensible heat difference. Okay? For example, transfer it into osmotic chemical potential energy. This is something that chemical engineers know about. This is third generation technology. So these are some of the things. Solar is the main long-term source to sustain us for millennia, more than that. But immediately, waste heat recovery. Singapore's focused on this. Your students here at NUS, I think it's a focus that in some way or another you need to work into your own thinking.
So, Michael, the energy, alternative energy is always, of course, a controversial topic. The thing about alternative energy is the energy could be free or could be more renewable or sustainable, but the cost of generating those energy could be large in the sense that you use materials that are not readily available. What do you think about that?
Before I answer that question, let me try and nuance what Bill Krantz has said. Let's look back historically, because if you don't understand history, you will repeat it terribly many times over. We use the term renewable and alternative energy, but my belief is that anything that is alternative will be the advanced solutions of the future. So think about that. And in the roadmap that I finished for Singapore and what we do for the future, we have to go back to the future. Anybody knows Doc and Marty McFly? Anybody seen that movie, the set of movies? That's right. We have to go back to the future, and let me explain what I mean by that. Go back to primitive time. The only sources of energy that we got were basically solar energy and plants. You use wood and all that, but they all came from solar sources. Where do you think our fossil fuels came from? What are fossil fuels? They are basically biomass and our ancestors that decayed under the temperature and pressure of the earth. So everything derives from solar and also the heats and the earth's geothermal. So when we go back to renewables, we're going back to what we've always had. So now let's look at what I call the Hubbard curve that everybody looks at, where everybody talks about peak oil and when it will disappear. And Bill is correct, we have a finite source in terms of his 0.4 year joule. The reason is this: when you talk about peak oil, you're asking when is the peak of production. And those of you who have seen the Hubbard curve, if you are given a closed curve, you can always do an integral. And let me tell you what the integral means. You take that Hubbard curve, and we are always wrong in peak oil production because Exxon and Shell will always find better ways of exploration, and they will always keep moving up the peak, but that peak will asymptote to a zero sometime in the future. So when you get a closed curve, just integrate that curve. You know what the integral tells you? The integral tells you that it took the Earth, plus all the decay, 3.4 billion years to produce that net integral of that curve of fossil fuels that we have. 3.4 billion years. That's how old the Earth, when vegetation started on Earth. When you talk about peak oil and you debate peak oil, you are debating a number n times 10 to the 3. Because in n times 10 to the 3, that's when the curve gets to 0. So why are we arguing about n when it is n times 10 to the 3 and the Earth took 3.4 times 10 to the 9 to produce that source? Just think about it. So we are really agonizing about the wrong issues on peak oil, which then gets back to the future when we run out of oil, fossils, when we have to defossilize, as Joe Eads puts it, we have to go to renewables. Now here comes your answer. How do you do renewables when it is really pricey and given grid parity? Those of you, anybody read Jessica Chiam's view on solar energy and the great resort world? You know, how many $1 million were the solar panels in Resort World? Somebody? You read Straits Times, guys, besides reading your journals? Okay. If you take Jessica Chiam's, I suggest you all go back. You're all chemical engineers, which means you can do basic arithmetic. Do the calculation on the return on investment on the solar panels in Resorts World. Okay, all the data is in Straits Times. You just have to do the calculation. This is why I have to nuance Bill's view on why solar is high potential. Because you have to go buy your food, you have to have your return on investment. The Resorts World stuff, and I double-checked with my friends at Phoenix Solar, who actually is producing solar, or at least integrating solar panels. If the Resorts World solar panels, the payback period, assuming a linear calculation, that means you don't have interest rates, is 28 years before you get payback. Okay, I want any of you to go into investments and go tell your father, I want investments and I want a payback period of 28 years. He'll say, do you want to go start working now instead of going to school? Okay, now, that was only a linear payback. If you used a 3% payback, 3% interest rate, the payback on that solar panel is 45 years. How long does a solar panel last today? Anybody? 35. Huh? 35 years. Okay, you go back and check. Given current salinity in the air, given humidity and given our temperatures, it's not 25. But the payback period with a 3% interest is 45 years. So while we have to go back to solar, we have to nuance how do we move to solar. But in the end, that's all we have. And if I want to give the positive view, because this is the real life engineering view and the economic calculation that you need to understand. Because in the end, we don't have anything except solar and geothermal. So now, let's go back and think about the positive view on why solar is so positive. Even because I also consult with the Department of Defense. And the Department of Defense can come up with, U.S. Department of Defense, you can come up with really fascinating calculations. We will now put up a ring of solar arrays up in across the equatorial band, all around the Earth, just 1 kilometer, and I'm going to capture all that solar efficiency, all the solar radiation. And remember, out there are no clouds and all that. Don't ask me how I do that. But if I do that calculation, over a period of a year, I will generate the world's remaining supply of fossil fuels in 1 year, which is that number that Bill gave you. Just 1 kilometer broad in synchronous orbit around the Earth. Now, how I get it up there, how much it costs, what's the payback period, how much I put down back on Earth, and how do I microwave it down, and I fly through that beam and I get microwaved. But clearly solar potential is really high, but we have to nuance it with current realities. And I think it is just looking at that aspirational picture and taking a pragmatic view that we have to figure it out. So now let's get to the Singapore context. If I cover every roof in Singapore with solar panels today, 100% of all the roofs, and those of you who can do sine cosine calculations, if I cover even the walls, and Singapore is a very small area, how much of Singapore's electricity will we generate? Anybody? Given the cloudy days, given when Indonesia starts its forest burn, and now you get clouds and all that. How much of Singapore's total electrical use will you meet if I cover every wall and every roof of the buildings? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
10%, 1%.
No, actually it's better than that, because solar is not bad. I'm also giving you, you will actually get 22% of Singapore's electrical energy needs, and that's because you don't reach Straits Times. I was quoted in Straits Times on that. So solar is not bad, but again, that's only your electron diet. But you've got to fly planes, you've got to drive your cars. Some of you even drive SUVs. You've got to have boats. And the electrical diet in Singapore is actually very small relative to the liquid diet. So solar itself has not produced a fraction other than the 22% of electricity. So given the payback period, given the size of Singapore, you have to do these nuanced calculations. Thank you.
How would ExxonMobil respond to that if from the perspective of a petrochemical company?
Our idea is that in order to cover the energy demand for the future, you'll need all the different sources of energy you can find. So besides the common ones, you will have to use things like solar energy, wind energy, but you have to use it in places where you can use it. So wind energy in Singapore is no use. Solar energy in Singapore can give a limited contribution, but not an insignificant one. But as a society, if we want to ensure that mankind can live much longer than the next century or shortly after that, we'll have to use all the different means that we can to find energy. Ultimately, as an engineer, it is obvious that you can, if you consume, then consumption, and sometime it will be over. There's a finite amount of it. So ultimately you'll have to get back into balance. But for that, you need a lot of new technology, you need a lot of smart people to develop that technology, and until you've done that, you will have to use all the different means that you have. And if you look in our energy outlook, there's just a new one which looks from now until 2030, then we expect the greatest contribution to energy production, if you like, to be the reduction of consumption. So we think that by using energy wisely, people will save a lot of energy, and we will have become a lot more efficient by 2030, which is a requirement, of course, because there is no status quo. Singapore is a well-developed country, but there's lots of countries that are still developing and have the right to use energy as well. So all of us will have to use all the means we can find to generate energy, but also to conserve energy.
Thank you. So Joe, you have mentioned about the cost of generating alternative energy. How do you feel about the solution to reducing the cost and making producing energy from solar or from biofuels more cost efficient?
I think we've got to look at how the whole balance fits together. I'm personally not a great fan of solar for this region in the tropics because of the cloudiness, and photovoltaic isn't really the solution I would push for from a cost. And I wouldn't be pushing a technology as being the latest and greatest, where I believe photovoltaic has an efficiency of something like 12%, and it's about 6% efficiency you get from thin film technology. And saying that's great when we're dealing with, we do power generation, if we use just a power generation site, maybe 40% efficiency. If we do cogeneration on our plants, we can be getting 80-90% efficiency, potentially, because we put the heat recovery in and we then use the steam when we generate the electricity to put back in the plant. Being aware of those technologies is very, very crucial. The technology as chemical engineers we should be looking at and pushing at is more energy from waste. If we take Singapore as an example, Edwin Koo, he's been a nominated member of parliament here and is also a chemical engineer, is currently generating something like 3 or 4 megawatts of power from the waste food from 20% of your hawker centres here in Singapore. That not only is almost free energy, including credits and everything else, it's reducing the amount of methane that's going up into the atmosphere, which has 16 times the carbon dioxide footprint. So you're solving a lot of problems within one shot, and by integrating things like waste and energy together and then looking at new materials, we start to change the way we do things. Other things on energy from waste is if we then look at pyrolysis, we're then we could take things like waste plastics, vaporize them back, and then suddenly we have new materials which we then have to convert into new products. And we can also recover energy potentially by burning some of them, and we can recover some of the streams to make the polymers and different plastics we'll need in the future. They're areas for research which are going to be very fascinating as chemical engineers in combining energy with alternative products. That's probably going to be the way forward that I would be looking at if I was looking at the next 20, 30 years.
The pharma industry has been one of the ones that are concerned with saving energy, and we were in a recent seminar by GSK, and they're actually focusing on how to reduce the use of energy. So would Sanofi Aventis have any plans to use alternative energies or ways to decrease the use of energy?
Yes, of course. I mean, one part of the energy management strategy we have is to look at alternate sources. And I've heard the gentlemen on either side having different views on what it means to have, let's say, financially efficient usage of alternate sources. I think this is going to be solved only when the usage is going to increase. I mean, more is the number of people that will use solar panels, the costs are going to come down, the payback is going to improve, and so on. In our company, we have a very structured program on solar panels. One of the things we do is share data across sites, across continents, and there's going to be more and more of it coming. So of course, it's clearly for us to go systematically in one way or the other. We're looking at putting up wind farms where it's possible, not here in Singapore, of course, and then join the national grids in terms of electricity and see what we're doing on wind. In terms of biomass, I mean, ours is a big company, and not many of you may be aware, but we also own farms, and we use a lot of biomass to get either the starting materials or intermediates for some of our products. And there are structured programs in place to utilize these biomass or byproducts of our process in a useful manner to improve the energy situation. So we have a lot of it going, yes.
Do you think it is cost efficient and is worthwhile for the industry to go more into this?
Absolutely. I mean, I think when we look at things, sometimes we look at the more glamorous things. We look at solar panels, photovoltaic cells, and so on. I mean, look, sitting in this room, having all of these lights, and when there's bright sunlight outside, it should make us think. Even a simple thing like a light conduit, which will bring in that sunlight into this room and do away with these lights, is going to be useful. So I think a lot of the things that we do are not necessarily rocket science. We have sites where we use solar panels to preheat the boiler feed. It's very efficient, and those panels have lasted, I know for sure, because I've been seeing them for the last 20 years with minor maintenance. So I think there are big things to be done and the small things to be done, and we are very confident, and we see actually the financial gains on a day-to-day basis.
All right. We have some questions from the audience, and they are quite general. There's one very controversial question: is the energy consumption by the world involves developed countries and developing countries. So for the developing countries, the cost is significant if we want to generate energy using solar, nuclear, or other fuels. So what would the panel members think of providing maybe help to the developing countries? Because as we have discussed, this probably is the way to go, but at the moment it is very costly. Maybe Bill, do you have any thoughts on that?
I love this one because I think the panel had a chance to get together before we came formally before you and try to figure out if we had any common denominators. Is this working? I think it's working. Yeah, it's working. Yeah. Back row, yeah, you can hear me, right? I don't know whether you want to, but I think you can. But one of the things we quickly came to an agreement on is the fact that the energy solutions, the sustainable energy solutions that we need to come up with, there's no right answer. That it has to be appropriate to the country, to the culture, to what's acceptable, to the markets. It has to be profitable. And let me take an example. I mean, we have a lot of students from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan here. One of the they talk about renewable, they talk about energy supply in terms of generations. First generation started 100 years ago with the Industrial Revolution, burning fossil fuels, and then we moved on. And third generation technology now is to use biomass gasification. Now, where might that really work? Well, biomass gasification, when you think about it, countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh have already started technologies where they're briquetting biomass. And as I think I already mentioned, those briquettes have 70% of the energy of charcoal. There's already a technology in place that would be an easy step to move towards biomass gasification. So that may make a lot of sense for those countries. Okay? On the other hand, you take countries like the Scandinavian countries where there's not a lot of sunlight. They are way ahead of us in terms of harnessing wind energy. About 15% of the energy demand of the Scandinavian countries across the board is supplied by wind energy already. So to prescribe wind energy for the world, oh well, we better have some wind. As somebody's already pointed out, Dirk from ExxonMobil, what works here in Singapore, or what might not work here, is quite different. We have a different system here. So I think in terms of your thinking, you need to think globally. You need to think what will work for the area you're focused on. And I would bet most of you here will end up working in the global marketplace. So you need to familiarize yourself with that, and I think our curriculums needed to adjust to that. I think it's an incredibly important question, Yanhua, that there's a big difference between the developing countries in their energy use and in the cost of developing new technologies. But all of us, no matter where we come from, no matter where we have to work, we need to focus on what will work in our country where we're responsible for coming up with better technology. Now let me turn it over to some of the experts.
I know Michael wants to add to that. But before you do that, maybe you can add on. There's another question that's related to this. Is the claim that the green energy sector is less market-driven and more policy-driven. So if we were to implement this in the developing countries, what role would the government have to play in providing these renewable energy or to regulate it?
Policy questions for a nerd or a techie like me is really a tough one. So let me try and build on what Bill says first in the first one. Quick question around hand. If you don't show your hands, I'm going to be sort of not very happy. How many here are in Energy Carter, the student organization? How many students here are in the NUS Energy Carter here? Hands? This is scary. You're asking about energy and none of you are in one of the best student organizations in NUS is Energy Carter. I'm an advisor to that student organization. The reason why I ask is this. If you were in Energy Carter, you would have seen the presentation last year by Grameen Shakti. Okay, Grameen Shakti is in Bangladesh. And remember what I said about payback periods on resort rules on solar panels? Grameen Shakti with microfinance in Bangladesh has got one of the best renewable energy programs with solar panels and just batteries. Because think about this. We are in a grid, what we call a grid-connected society. If you're in the rural areas where you really can provide enlightenment and light for just, let's say, 4 hours in the evening or 6 hours in the evening with solar panels stored into batteries. You provide commerce, you provide the ability for people to study at night and everything. And if you had seen this Bangladeshi, Grameen Shakti, talk about how well the solar panel programs, some with aid from advanced countries, some with Bill Gates Foundation and all that, it's an inspiring story. And my belief is that if you guys are hitting your books too much and don't attend these very active student organizations, you're doing yourself a disservice. Join the guys in Energy Carter. They brought in this, I forgot his name, Dilip, anybody know his name? I forgot, but he was the head of Grameen Shakti. It's a microfinancing thing, and where if you have no light, you're off-grid, clearly solar panels with batteries will work, especially if the solar panels are then donated or somewhat subsidized. But in the end, you are developing microeconomies and all of that. So go Google Grameen Shakti and Bangladesh and you'll see that example. The other example, which is why somebody mentioned here, is a very important one. Energy security comes from energy diversity. And in the rural areas, for instance, in this area, the whole area of biomass waste, forest droppings and all that, through gasification or something, you can develop these systems. The other one, which we use in the U.S. military, and remember, U.S. military operates in very strange abandoned areas that are not grid isolated, is low-head hydro. If you think in the old days of if you just have a small head on a stream, if you develop these low-head hydro devices, you just toss it in the stream. Our special forces, when they run out of their batteries, need to be charged, you throw this little thing in a stream, and now you generate enough to power your batteries. But if you're in the rural areas, these low-head hydro systems work. So my belief is that from the military, you can get very interesting transfers. GPS, internet, now low-head hydro, a few other developments that can be done. So my belief is that it is really using your imagination and using what's available in these rural areas. The other ones that if you see what is going on with EMA, all the microgrid programs. Anybody knows about all the microgrid developments in EMA, in NTU, one even here in NUS? Anybody know about it? This is the whole idea, is how do you harness, clearly from the sun, DC sources, synchronous AC, asynchronous AC, all of that. How do you harness it such that you form small microgrids? I think these are little, and Pulau Ubin is one major project that's up for, if you guys want to put in a proposal, you may be too late, but these are things that will enable small systems to work. These are distributed generation, because in a way, if God gave us power that is distributed, why should we put it through centralized power plants and then redistribute it again? Use it directly in distributed generation sources. And Singapore has about 4 projects ongoing now in these areas. So if there's mantra I leave you, it is distributed generation on energy security to energy diversity. I didn't answer the policy questions, because my belief is that if you have a good government, it should really catalyze it. I tend to be a market guy, economist type guy, but governments do have a role to incentivize and catalyze projects. Okay.
That's very good. We have a follow-up question to this decentralized production of energy. So how does the industry feel about decentralized production, especially related to chemical engineering type of industry for energy generation, and how would that affect jobs for chemical engineers? Would maybe Joe or Sanjay, would you like to?
I'll show you this one. When I started off as a young graduate, I worked in Holland, and the very first project I worked on was a cogeneration plant, 1.2 gigawatt power station for the Dow chemical site. We needed it, as you mentioned earlier about steam crackers, we needed something like 1,600 tons an hour of 90 bar steam. And that was what created and drove the economics behind putting a power station in for that, yet the site only used 1/3 of that electricity. The other 2/3 were sold out onto the grid. The next site I went out onto had a 5 megawatt cogeneration unit on it to generate the steam using a steam turbine on the site, doing fine chemicals for rubber chemical business. In Singapore context, I've started up the first 1 megawatt gas engine here. Edwin, who did the energy from waste, started up number 2 and 3. We're quite far behind over here in using cogeneration of power built into our processes, where we put a cogeneration in size based upon our steam demand, and then we either then generate the electricity and outsell it back on the grid, or we try and use it internally. That's probably one of the key technologies we need to sort of embrace to bring in within our processes and our decentralization. The support for some of those technologies isn't here yet. We have big problems on the gas engine with the maintenance, because not many people have brought them in. They haven't got so keeping it reliable and stable is very, very difficult. We need to improve our expertise in the region in these technologies, and we have to think about where do we have a waste stream that beforehand you might be flaring off. Can we take that and burn it to create electricity and potentially create steam? And where can we go ahead and recover that? For developing countries, it's very interesting because I actually think decentralized power, not just for industrial use but for domestic use, is also going to be essential. To put in the full infrastructure of power networks and water networks is going to be incredibly expensive and not cost effective. Putting in decentralized power might be slightly less efficient, but you don't have to put the infrastructure in place around it. And we're going to have to train up and put the capability in for more technical people to be able to support and maintain that equipment as well. And that's probably the other side as well, is the more we move to technology and implementing technology, we really have to look at the maintenance and making sure it's got the long-term reliability in there as well. So decentralized power is going to be essential. It's going to be the way forward. From a policy point of view, governments have to embrace decentralized power instead of saying we own the National Power Board, we're the only ones generating it. They've got to open up the grids to allow this decentralized power. And decentralized power in phase 2 will come from energy from waste. So we'll be taking a waste stream, we'll be getting off gases, and from there we can then generate the power as well. But we need the policy in place to allow us to do this in the first place before we can put the economic drivers to follow.
But shouldn't industry be the main driver for decentralized power generation? Because they are the ones who are generating the waste. So, for example, the pharmaceutical industry, you produce a lot of solvents that either, if it's not recovered, is going to be put into a digester for it to be reduced. So, does it make sense for the industry to drive this rather than waiting for the government to have a policy?
Yes and no. In my experience, I can only speak from my experience. The industry, of course, I mean, it's driven by economics, driven by profit, driven by cost of the product in the end. So we drive it. It's clear. Where the government or the policy needs to step in is what can be done in case of, let's say, non-critical mass, in case where collaborations are required. I mean, Joe talked about cogeneration or tri-generation. And this needs two components of energy, whether it's electricity, whether it's steam, and so on. If we talk from the point of view of industry, maybe one unit does not have the possibility to go in for a cogen because, I mean, we may need the steam, but we may not need the electricity, or vice versa. And that's where the policy comes into picture. And in some places, I can share my experiences in India, of course. If really the policy puts very watertight compartments in what is allowed, what is not allowed. I mean, joining grids, as someone mentioned, only the government can do it, and it's only the government that can allow people to join or draw from the grid and so on. So clearly it's industry driven, but I mean, it has to be supported by policy.
For the petrochemical industry, though, one of the questions here is for countries, but I would phrase it in terms of for industry to divert research resources towards energy saving. But for the petrochemical industry, it's more important because your sources of raw material is the fossil fuel. So instead of maybe using the fossil fuel to produce energy, use the fossil fuel to produce products that are more useful than energy. So would the research be better to divert that in that direction rather than to use it for energy production?
We use in producing chemicals, of course, essentially fossil fuels and making it a chemical product. I'm not so sure that you can use alternative fuels to do the same thing. Eventually you might be able to do it, but I think you've got to use the right thing in the right place. So when it comes to biofuels and that type of material, I think you better use those for your energy production and use what you have in natural resources in oil to make your chemicals from. But maybe to come back on the discussion we were earlier about creating the right environment for investment in cogeneration and tri-generation. the industry has been pushing that in Singapore, and the government is now listening. They're working their way toward, at least for cogeneration, making it easier for companies to implement good projects. The hurdle so far has been that we can't produce energy and supply it to the grid, which has held back some, for Singapore, very good projects, I think. But that's about to change now. So you need some dialogue as well to make all these things work.
I want to nuance his answer a little bit relative to biomaterials just for fuel, because I think the first 20 years of my industrial career I was with DuPont, and DuPont is a polymers firm, so most of our raw materials come from petrochemicals. But over time, if you look at the DuPont portfolio, for very high value chemicals now, polymers, we're actually going to biosources. And this is an area that I believe should get you guys very excited, for those of you who are now biochemical engineers. Let me give you an example. If you take shellfish, you can produce chitin, and this chitin could actually be turned into polymers. Okay? If you look at polylactic acid, if you look at a lot of these DuPont going into some of the bio interfaces, you're seeing that now we're using a lot of biomaterials to produce propane diols and all of that. So there's a whole area now that is getting very exciting for those who know especially for you students, to do the biopolymer interface. Okay, so there is that role that I think you should do. The other thing that you need to learn now is that if you get excited, is to start recognizing that for those of us who are working in industry, if you are in the old-fashioned verticals, if you're in polymers, if you're in paints, and chemical engineers are in paints and in just about everything, chemical engineer, the DuPont mantra is you're a chemical engineer, you can do anything. We can even turn you into a patent lawyer or a patent liaison guy in your old age. So the issue is, in traditional disciplines, you could almost map the growth rate. All the exciting growth is at the interfaces between disciplines, where polymers hit biochemistry, where biochemistry affects paints. Okay, so think of that, getting a multidisciplinary excitement in your work, and then you will do very, very interesting stuff. For instance, biocompatible materials, like DuPont has probably the best directory of materials that will not activate the C3 complement. So these become things that you can insert into your body because you don't activate the C3 complement. It's non-thrombogenic. So start getting that interest in so some of you can become surgeons, you do implants and all of that. That's an area chemical engineers really revel in. Thank you.
All right. So we are almost out of time. So before we finish, would any of you like to wrap up? Bill? Any final thoughts on sustainable energy development?
I think the panel has come up with so many things that provoke questions. I liked especially what Michael just said, that we're here, I think, to inspire and motivate these young people. And what he said about working at the interface between disciplines, I think, is so important. I think in some respects, and I think the faculty here, Yanhua and I will certainly probably agree, that we've tended to become more specialized in the way we, in our research and things, and it's necessary to be competitive. But on the other hand, the drivers, as Michael has pointed out, very often creativity is going to be at the interface between disciplines. That's where new thought comes, because you bring two areas of sort of almost disparate expertise together, and the magic happens, and some new technology or new product comes out of it. So I like that thinking very much, and a compliment to Michael for bringing that out. I think I'll pass on to some of the other panel members and get their reactions.
Sanjay, any thoughts before we close?
I absolutely agree with what has just been said. the multidisciplinary advantage and the ability of the chemical engineers to talk to different agencies, for me, remains the biggest strength of the chemical engineers. Other than that, I think considering the location we are in and you are all from, and we heard something about going over to developing countries and so on, I think you need to keep a broad-minded approach to see the situation as it is. I mean, talking about energies, the site I managed before coming here to Singapore in India, we analyzed our costs on 4 bars. One was energy, one was consumables, depreciation, and personal cost. Very simple. When I came here, the costs were analyzed on 3 bars: depreciation, personal cost, and consumables. And the energies sat inside of these consumables, and it was thought to be a fixed, nothing can happen. We put 3% or 4% inflation each year and keep increasing. After we analyzed, what we found was the kind of effort we had made in my previous site on energies, reduced that by X percentage. If we could do the same here, the savings were in fact going to be bigger than what we had managed to save in the previous site where I was there. So you need to look at the situation or the location that where you are. I mean, and I think that's very relevant to this group that we are talking to now. Thank you.
Thank you. And Joe, any advice for our students if they are interested in going to the energy field?
I think the whole mix of being a chemical engineer coming up for the next 20, 30 years is actually very exciting. Sir Peter Head, has been the president of the Institution of Civil Engineers, talks about engineers are about to enter what they call the ecological evolution. It's probably the first time since the 1950s, if I exclude the pharmaceutical industry, that we are having to design new processes, we're dealing with new materials, we're putting new technology through. The classical, the petrochemical processes haven't changed drastically in that time period. When we start taking new materials from waste streams, we mentioned before about developing new polymers, this whole new material technology and then how to scale it up to an industrial scale, and then implementing and introducing sustainable design techniques, including energy, cogeneration, trigeneration, into that is going to be a very interesting. And so therefore it's the first time that from a research point of view and development point of view, you've got the opportunity to change how the world is going to be in 40 years' time. The exception probably is the pharmaceutical industry. The last 20, 30 years has been spent developing brand new molecules to cure your cancers and your heart problems and everything else, and it's had a drastic effect. Chemically, that's coming close to an end because it's getting very difficult to generate new molecules. We're moving on to biomolecules for generating the very high-end ones, but the development now will be developing biotechnology and chemical technology into new materials and new products, and we have to put in good energy principles into those designs when we look to scale them up from the research side to the pilot side and up into full commercial manufacture.
Right. And Derek, what do you think about the field for our future?
I think the future in engineering in general and chemical engineering is very good. Engineers are extremely versatile. We notice that when the times in the economy are good because they disappear in all sorts of other jobs where we would rather not let them go. But there is also a lot of opportunity for engineers in the coming years. The fact that we've got all these challenges about climate change and finding the energy that will keep our planet going, they're challenges. They're challenges for you guys. There's opportunities to find creative solutions. I've got no doubt that there will be solutions to all these issues, and I've got no doubt that chemical engineers will be a large part of finding the solution. So you've got a lot to look forward to.
All right. So this is a very interesting topic, and I think we could still go on for another hour, but I think we have other things to do, so I think we have to close the session for now. So let me thank all our panel members again, and thank them for coming to this session.
Thank you, Prof. Tong. And I, on behalf of GSA, would like to thank the panelists again for their inputs towards the contribution of chemical engineers in fixing the issue. And let me quote some of the statements that came about the decentralized power and the assurance that the grad students will have jobs. And on the revision of government policies based on government-specific rules and regulations, and the right thing in the right place. And also thanks to the panel and very specifically to Dr. Michael Kwa for giving us the to-do list. For the grad students, join the Energy Cadet and Google Rami Shakti. And for the faculties, about proposal writing in energy. And on behalf of GSA, I would now like to invite the faculties of the Department of NUS Chemical Engineering to hand over the memento to the panelists. I request Prof. Tom to hand over the memento to Prof. Wilkrantz. Prof. Laksh to hand over the memento to Dr. Michael Kwa. Prof. Mark says to hand over the memento to Mr. Sanjay Chavan.
Thank you very much.
Again, Mark says to give the memento to Mr. Joe Eads. And Prof. Tongenwa to hand over the memento to Mr. Joe. Thanks, Prof. And now it's time to distribute the prizes for the events that occurred. I now request Prof. Matthias to hand over the prizes to the winners of oral and poster presentations. In total, we conducted 5 oral presentations sessions and 5 poster sessions, and about 45 participants in all. From this, we have chosen 2 best oral presentations and 5 best posters from each session based on expertise inputs. Now, we have with us Prof. Matthias to distribute the prizes, and the second prize in oral presentation goes to Suhanya from the Department of Chemical Engineering. The first prize in oral presentation goes to Hyojin Yoon, the work on affinity bead-based temperature controllable sensor for cancer diagnosis. And now the time to distribute the best posters from each session. First, to Vera Joan Rettier on the topic Development of Liquid Crystal Mediated Bioassays for Detecting Urinary Albumin. Okay, the presenter is missing, so I will take the award on their behalf. Okay, one for me. And next we have another award to S. Najafi Nober for the work on adsorption and diffusion of gases in CUVT. The next best poster award to Homan Kang for the work on optical encoding method using surface enhanced Raman scattering. Anybody from the audience to collect on the behalf? Yes, we have one. Okay. She don't want me to carry another one. and the fourth one to Heibo Zhang on the work on an improved differential evolution algorithm for global optimization. The last one, only in the order, for the best poster to Raghu Beta for the work on effects of diesel biodiesel blends on particulate emission. Okay, that ends the prize distribution, but it's high time to appreciate the efforts of GSA members, and a mere word of thanks would be more of an understatement to appreciate their efforts. There were a lot of contenders, including me, and it was really a tough choice to choose from. However, two of our mates outran others in their contributions. Any show has to be run by producers. We too had quite a few. But we have to and must thank the backbone behind the show up of sponsors and collection of cash to run the show. And in this regard, it's my pleasure to call upon Prof. Tong Enwa, the GSA advisor, to hand over the award to Abai as a token of appreciation for his efforts in making a grand show. In this regard, we are handing over an award for Best Corporate Communicator of the Year to Mr. Abai Anand. And last but not the least, the director of the show. The president, GSA president, Kanchi Lakshmi Kiran, and it's not a biased statement. It's right from the bottom of her heart. Okay, there it is. An award to the president for the excellent leadership caliber that he had. The president of Graduate Student Association going to receive an award as well as a memento from the GSA advisor, Prof. Tong Enwa. Kiran. I was a member of the judging committee of these two awards, so I don't have anyone. The budget was optimal, and hence I have to stop handing over prizes and awards to dollars as of now. But still, we have the caliber to distribute awards through our birds, and on that note, I now invite the General Secretary of the Association, Mr. Sadev, to deliver the shower of awards through words, and they call it outside vote of thanks.
Respected guest of honor, Dr. William B. Krantz, keynote speaker, Dr. Matthias Pilsing, respected panel members, faculty members, participants, and my dear friends, a very good evening. The famous astronomer and mathematician Galileo Galilei once said, "You cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him discover it within him." It is this art of discovery that has brought all of us here to interact and share our ideas on the same platform. In this regard, I am very grateful to Professor William B. Krantz and Dr. Matthias Pilsing for being the keynote speaker during the 2 days of this conference. I would then like to thank our panelists and the moderator for sharing their valuable time with us. I'm most thankful to the participants coming from different countries, including United States, England, Iran, Japan, Malaysia, India, Thailand, Indonesia, Korea, and Vietnam, and of course Singapore. Without whose active involvement, the event wouldn't have been so lively and energetic. My heartfelt thanks to our sponsors for all their support. My sincere thanks to the head of department, faculty members, and administrative staff for supporting us all the way right from the beginning till now. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the faculty members who accepted our invitation to act as the judges of all the sessions, oral presentation and poster presentation. Last but not the least, I would like to thank our GSA advisor, Associate Professor Tang Yenhua and Dr. Saifei Khan. And also our President, Mr. Lakshmi Kiran. Actually, he didn't know that we are going to give him a prize. So, and also all my friends in GSA who helped organizing this event. Once again, thank you one and all. Thanks.
Thanks, Sadiq. In addition to that, on behalf of GSA, yet again, let me thank all the souls who contributed towards the success of the program. And we have a few announcements to make. First, we have a high tea waiting for you outside. And regarding the certificates for the international participants, it's available in the registration counter. You can collect it from our volunteers. There will be a photo session for the international participants and local participants. So if you want to be a part of it, you can stay back, and those photos will be put up in the website within a week's time. And the participants are requested to remove their posters from the holdings. Yeah, that's it. And thanks for coming, and have a nice trip back to home. And if at all you want to thank me, my name is Loganathan. Thanks.